Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. Clearly, I am sponsored by Nikon. No, just kidding. No, I'm not. I am a fan, though. For today's video, we're going to be looking at a camera that I think set the gold standard for DSLRs back when it was released. The Nikon D800. If you couldn't tell, this is not a review of the Nikon D700, which is another camera. For, you see, the price of the D700 is currently still a little bit uncomfortable, and I happened to run into a D800 for an insane price, much less than the going rate of a D700, which I realized was a steal of a deal. So clearly, I bought a D800 instead. Although, to be 100% honest, I've really wanted a D800 more than I've wanted a D700. As much as the D700 is currently making waves now, I do have a lot of memories reading reviews about the D800 when it came out, and reading headlines that were a little bit sensational, like, D800 makes medium format cameras irrelevant, due to the, at the time, very pixel dense sensor. And there were like all sorts of titles and articles that read similarly to that about the D800. And personally, for me, it left a bit of an impact on my perception of the camera. And it's also a camera that I've actually never owned before, so I was pretty excited to get the chance to have one for such a bargain basement price. Now, that said, I'll make this video short if you don't want to sit through my entire review. The D800 is still an awesome camera if you're looking for a full frame DSLR in the F-mount variety, and your budget is somewhere between 400 and 600 USD. It's honestly very, very hard to beat. You get, relatively gobs and gobs of resolution, pretty excellent dynamic range, solid high ISO, and a flippy, flappy, slappy mirror. And, all of that is a pretty good combo. Otherwise, stick around and we'll get into basically that statement in a whole lot of detail. And, I'll get into specific things I like about the camera, and of course, things that I like a bit less. Let's get into it. What is the Nikon D800? Well, it's this camera right here, and it's a full-frame DSLR, announced on the 7th of February 2012. It features a 36.3 megapixel CMOS sensor with an ISO range from 100 to 6400, and with expansion bringing that to 50 and 25,600. The camera has dual memory card slots, one CF card, one SD card, UHS Type 1. Autofocus is achieved with the advanced Multicam 3500 FX, and that features 51 points. 15 of those are cross points, 11 of which are extra sensitive f8 points. Now, metering is handled by Nikon's 3D Color Matrix 3 system, which features a 91,000 point RGB sensor. Shutter is good for 30 seconds up to 1/8,000th of a second, with the flash sync at 1/250th, and the shutter life is rated for about 200,000 clickies. The camera's shooting rate, it's 4 FPS for up to 17 RAWs, and being a DSLR, it features an OVF, of course, and it's a pentaprism, as expected. It covers 100% of the frame at a magnification of 0.7. The rear of the camera features a 3.2-inch non-touchy LCD with 921 K dots. Additionally, this camera also has a video mode. It can record 1080p, and at the time it was one of Nikon's more serious attempts at video, following the footsteps of Canon's 5D2. Now, the D800 It uses a battery pack that is known as the EN-EL15, used in a host of other Nikon products, and it's good for 900 CPA-rated shots. Now, the camera with the battery and CF card weigh in at 994 grams, almost half an oct, about 1 plena. And MSRP for the camera was $2,999 USD in the past dollars. In a postmodern mega inflation bucks, that is 4,120 USD, or roughly 5,730 Canadian maple tokens. What's special about the D800? In a word, the sensor. I know. In today's world of dual gain, backside illuminated future turbo sensors that have 200 stops of dynamic range and 50 billion megapixels with a minus 10 millisecond readout speed doesn't seem all that special. However, transport yourself back to 2012, and before that, in Nikon's own lineup, the full-frame cameras were the Nikon D700, the D3, D3S, which were 12 megapixel cameras, and if you had big money, you could get the D3X, which was the big resolution hitter for Nikon, coming in at 24 megapixels, and then similarly, the D4 was freshly announced, coming in at 16 megapixels. And then out of nowhere, the D800 lands. And it lands with 36 megapixels, and it's not in a flagship body. It's basically cased in a D700 body. And, only a month after the D800 announcement, Canon would announce the 5D3, which featured a 22 megapixel sensor. And, similarly, Sony was fielding cameras that had, 24 megapixel full frame sensors like the A99. That was going to be announced a year later. Now, I know, resolution is not everything, but in this case, it sure made a great headline. And when I first heard the D800 numbers, I was gobsmacked. Imagine, to my surprise, when I heard that, this sensor defied logic. Not only was the pixel density incredible, the net dynamic range ended up being class leading, and high ISO was also pretty top tier, right? It's like the trifecta. And, that's the story. It wasn't just that this sensor had so many pixels, even though that was the headline grabber. It was that this sensor seemingly had no weaknesses. So much so that on paper, this thing still basically keeps up with a lot of sensors now when it comes to, stills. In terms of resolution, 36 megapixels is still quite a lot. So, it's not something to laugh at. D800 Controversy. For those of you that are unaware, there was some controversy with regard to the D800, specifically the autofocus system. There are a lot of reports of misaligned autofocus modules where you'd see pretty poo AF performance on the left side of the autofocus points, and for some reason the center and the right would be totally fine. Now, oddly enough, I couldn't really find a full advisory on Nikon's websites, but I was able to find some articles on Nikon Rumors where some owners of certain serial numbers got letters from Nikon indicating that their camera was eligible for a free repair. I'll link to that down in the description below. But if you happen to have a unit that's affected, right now you're in 2024, don't assume that you're going to be able to get it done at Nikon. Even if you could pay for it, I don't know that it'd be worth it to do. But that being said, I also found a link to a process where you could tweak the AF alignment yourself if you wanted to. So again, I'll link to that below. But yeah, that's the controversy with the D800. Seems like every camera's got one. shooting with the D800 operation and feel. Right off the bat, the control layout is very similar to the D200, which is perfect. And, by the way, I'll link to that review in the description below and maybe in a card above. But yeah, I love the D200 when it comes to ergonomics. As I said, basically perfect. So good. Now, the D800, it's pretty close. Now, it is chunky, but, it's not as big as the square body single digit Nikon cameras like the D3S, but, it is bigger than a D200. But that bigness does lead to a couple nice things. On one hand, it does feel quite excellent in your hands. The grip, it is nice and deep, well spaced away from the lens, even if you got big honky hands. Unlike me, I do not have big honky hands. But, I personally think if you have giant hands, you probably feel fine with this camera. Now, the other thing that's nice is that since there's so much surface area on this camera, you can cram so many buttons on the back of it. And, you can call that good ergonomics. But Nikon, they take it up a notch. The buttons and their placement seem to be placed where your fingers would naturally fall. And, for the most part, most of the Nikon cameras just kind of seem to be designed this way. And I really like that. Again, most of the controls on this camera and on other Nikon cameras that you want to change at eye level are doable at, with just your right hand. For example, you want to do your exposure comp, you can do that. With the exception of, oddly enough, ISO. But luckily, you can just jam it in auto ISO and you can let it do its thing. Now, the D800 also has another thing that helps increase ergonomic goodness. Crazy customization. Crazy compared to most cameras, even the D200. You can remap a whole bunch of things. For example, this custom button here, underneath the aperture preview, I set it to spot metering because that's just what I like. And for the aperture preview, I don't actually use aperture preview, but I actually enabled something that this camera has that's kind of interesting, an internal virtual horizon in the finder. Now, even the button on the top here, like bracketing, can be customized to a degree. So lots of customization. Now, it's not all quite perfect. Now, the very satisfying, CF door latch that was on the D200, it's no longer a latch. It's just a regular pull open cover. And honestly, it's got one weird button, and that's the movie mode. At a glance, it looks good, but when you think about it, it feels a bit misplaced since it feels like it's a button that's supposed to be pressed at eye level. But if you're in movie mode, you're not going to be using the finder anyways, you're going to be using live view. So, you probably could have gone with putting the record button on the back somewhere near the AF on button, but luckily you can remap the record button to be something useful. And I remapped mine to be an ISO button. So, still pretty good. And I think that's a win. Now, this camera, like I said, it's a bit heavy at 1 kilogram. So if you are concerned with the weight and you want a full frame camera and weight is one of your bigger things, check out the D600 or D610. Not as much resolution, but you save around 150 grams with those cameras coming in at 850 grams. Now, menus, they're pretty straightforward. They're basically your Nikon classic bits, even with the movie mode options. Basically, you got your tabs going down the left and your menu options on the right. Easy peasy. Now, that being said, depending on what you're looking for, there can be quite a bit of menu diving since there's a lot of options on the camera, especially with all the customizations and with the video options. There's a lot of stuff to go through. Now, this is where I think the D200 does things a bit better when it comes to ergonomics. Basically, I love all the configurations for the D800 and all that stuff, but it does at times feel like it's a bit too much. Where on the D200, where it was just more of a limited camera with limited customizations, the camera I think was just like basically perfectly planned, so you didn't really need to do that much fiddling around. Sure, you could customize stuff on the D200, but you won't spend an evening figuring out what things are on the D800, like I did, just setting it up just perfectly. It was more of a pick up and go kind of thing. Now, looking through the camera, moving on to our next talking point is the OVF. And that gives you, like I said, 0.7 times magnification at 100% coverage. And you get Nikon's cool options for overlaying a grid or overlaying your AF points. And all of these are quite nice. And earlier I mentioned it even has a proper nice internal horizon that you can project onto the finder. And it's actually really useful. I thought the one on the the Canon 1DX was cool, but this one, it's legitimately way more useful. And, as it turns out, quite a few DSLRs happen to have virtual horizons. I up till this point, up till the Canon, I just maybe not noticed. But yeah, overall, super cool, quite nice. Shooting with the D800, image quality and autofocus. First, I'm going to start off by saying that I like the images the D800 makes. For me, it lives up to the hype that I remember all those years ago. Now, I know I don't have the D800E, that's the version with the AA filter canceller, but the images that come out of this camera are still super detailed, and again, 36 megapixels is still a lot of resolution in the now times. And not only is the camera's resolution impressive, the dynamic range is excellent. The files have a pretty nice amount of malleability in them as a result. And I personally find high ISO on this camera is still very, very good. And again, not as good as modern backside illuminated sensors, but it's not like the images fall apart when you reach high ISOs. And honestly, it's no wonder that this series of camera, the D800, they're the gold standard for so long. It's because it just performs so well on all these things. Now, this isn't just me. If you like numbers, you can have a go and meander through the charts at the photons to photos webpage, peg the D800, and then click other modern cameras, and you can see the D800 isn't miles behind. For the most part, it's actually like pretty close to a lot of cameras today. You don't have the super fast readout speeds, and you don't got your 4K videos and whatnot, but as a stills camera, it's quite good. I am, again, quite happy shooting this camera through its entire unexpanded ISO range. The extra resolution helps hide any noise, and with modern noise reduction software, it does a good job of keeping things together without smearing a lot of detail. And even honestly, the high one, the ISO 12800-ish, it's not too bad. I would personally use it if I needed to use it, and again, just run it through noise reduction. The autofocusing on this camera, it is borrowed from the Nikon D4. As I said, 51 points, 15 cross, and of those, 8 of them are extra sensitive f8 cross points. And I personally find on mine, it is fairly quick to acquire and generally pretty accurate. AF alignment faults notwithstanding, I've personally not noticed mine having issue with that, but hopefully if you look for one, yours doesn't either. And, you know, with the 11 extra super sensitive points, I haven't had an issue with any focus on any static stuff that I'm normally shooting. Now, again, this is a DSLR, so the AF points don't cover the entire frame, just the center portion. But I personally think it covers a pretty big chunk of the frame, so it's pretty good for, what it's meant to do. And again, since it's pulled from the D4, it also has no real problems tracking action. Again, not as good as modern mirrorless systems that can track like jittery butterflies or whatever, but better than the average DSLR that I tend to review on my channel. For things like motorsport, racing, or any sort of like sport with like pretty linear motion, the D800 should be able to keep up pretty good. It's just that the more erratic motion of other sports probably best suited to the mirrorless world. That being said, with older tricks of the trade, the D800 should still be able to do it just fine. Now, all that said, the D800, it is not a speed demon. This is where it kind of shows its age, where, you're getting 4 FPS for 17 RAWs, and, let's have a listen. Okay, it's not the quickest, but the buffer isn't too shabby given the shooting speed, and I personally think this is one of the greatest sounding shutters that I've had in a long time. It's big, it's chunky, I'm a fan of it, and it sounds really clunky and whatnot, but it doesn't translate to huge vibration when you shoot it, so it's a double win. But with that, let's go have a look at some photos. video mode. So I did say earlier, this does shoot your 1080p's at 30 frames per second. Now, the D800 also tends to have, or not tends to have, it does have headphone and microphone jacks. So, you know, it was meant to be a bit of a more serious video shooter. And as a result, this camera in video mode can actually do continuous autofocus. Now, keep that in mind that this camera is from 2012 and therefore it has 2012 contrast detect autofocus. So don't be expecting miracles, but you know, we'll see how this pans out in the video samples that I shoot. So let's have a look at that. Recommendation. So in the beginning, I did recommend this wholeheartedly, and I'll be doing it again here. Now, we'll start with the going rate for these things. It's about 400 to 550 USD for one of these. And I will say, if you can stretch your budget a bit, I hear that the Nikon D810 fixes some issues with the D800. Apparently some quality of life stuff, and most importantly, it addresses that AF module alignment problem. So if you're worried about that, I would have a look at getting a D810 instead of a D800. Plus, the D810 by default doesn't have the AA filter, and it doesn't use the AA filter canceller. So, you know, if you want that extra sharpness, also look for that. Now, again, if prices overall for the D800 are a little too high for you, I'd again point to my next favorite camera in the series, the D600 series or the D610. Now, if the D800 is in your budget or you just want to have that extra resolution, it is still just overall a great buy. Again, along with good resolution, pretty solid ISO, it has excellent dynamic range. Plus, you know, if you're new to the Nikon F-mount system, it has an insane library of F-mount lenses you can mount. You can basically put on anything that is AI slash aperture indexing or newer lenses on the system, and it'll couple and meter. Just don't forget to set up your lens for that, and you do that in the menu of the camera, and then you'll even have things like your aperture value recorded and your EXIF data for those older manual focus lenses. Of course, being an older full frame camera, I think that this particular model, the D800, it's probably one of the best bang for buck systems that you can buy right now. Now, seriously though, I've noticed that looking around for older lenses, Sigma and Tamron lenses, if you're looking at the Nikon F-mount version, they're routinely like the best budget versions slash they're the cheapest ones. If you look at Canon EF versions, they tend to be a little more money than the Nikon F-mount versions, and it's probably just because the EF versions of those Sigma and Tamron lenses still can be used on modern cameras with an adapter while retaining autofocus, where with the Nikon there are less autofocus adapters available, so the prices for those lenses tend to be a bit lower. And again, for the purposes of this review, that makes the D800 and the Nikon F-mount system in general excellent bang for your buck. Conclusion. All right, so that's it for this video. But before we go, I do want to ask, did you buy one of these when it was new? And if you did, was the AF problem really that prevalent? I see a lot of articles on it, and it just seemed like there's a lot of stuff in the internet that pointed to this problem. And, you know, if you did notice the problem, did Nikon service it for you? Or was it only those specific serial numbers that they messaged the buyers directly that got serviced? I'm not super clear on how it went, but yeah, let me know in the comments below. And, you know, otherwise, I just want to know who's still rocking a D800 or D810, and do you plan to upgrade, or do you plan to use it till it dies, or is it like a backup body? I don't know. Again, with that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks, and until next time, goodbye.